Good morning and welcome to, what's a moderately wet and wild windy day here in Melbourne. My name's Rod Peppiatt. I'm the minister at the Avenue Uniting Church in Blackburn, Victoria, and we meet on the lands each week of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Welcome. My reflection this morning is only partly on a particular gospel story. It sits with one, but it's more focused on a series of conflicts at the end of Luke's gospel between Jesus and the leaders of the religious groups of his day. I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. But firstly, I'd like to read for you from Luke's gospel, chapter 20, from verse 27. When some Saducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him and asked him a question. "Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies leaving a wife but no children, then the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first married a woman and died childless. Then the second and the third married her, and so in the same way all 7 died childless. Finally the woman also died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will the children be? Whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had married her." Jesus said to them, "Those who belong in this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore because they are like angels and children of God, children of the resurrection." And the fact that the dead are raised, Moses himself showed in the story about the bush, where he speaks of the Lord as the God of Abraham, of Isaac and Jacob. Now he is God not of the living. I'll do that again too. Now he is God not of the dead, but of the living. For to God all of them are alive. Then some of the scribes answered, "Teacher, you have spoken well." And they no longer dared to ask another question. You will have noticed there a fair emphasis on the resurrection in that story, or on resurrection. I'd like to also read to you a short piece by Claire Boyd-McRae from an article called Heaven Home. She too focuses on resurrection. And she says this: "My reasons for being Christian have never had much to do with what might happen after death. Rather, my faith helps me to live in this present life. How does it do that? The portrait of Jesus in the Gospels attracts and compels me. That is the kind of human I want to be. The relationship I have with God through prayer and meditation is a daily reality and the source of anything I manage to do lovingly. The Christian community I am committed to helps me to try and live a little more as Jesus did. Nowhere in any of that is the thought of some kind of eternal reward. If God is perfect love, as I believe, then whatever does or doesn't happen after we die will be okay." So those readings have shaped my thoughts, and again my own experience and thoughts, I guess. "7 keen brothers heard a wedding bell. 7 keen brothers heard a wedding bell. But if one keen brother should now hear his death knell, there'd be 6 keen brothers to hear a wedding bell." Now, it's possible that I'm being a bit flippant here, but I'm in good company, because I think That was pretty much Jesus' response too to the Sadducees and the question about the 7 brothers and the resurrection, in which they didn't believe, and that poor woman. Only men could dream up a story like that. It's an interesting experience to read Luke's version of this story alongside those of Matthew and Mark. In the other two, Jesus is particularly scathing, dismissive of the question, telling the Sadducees that they understand neither the law nor God. Luke's a bit more measured, as you just heard, in how he responds as the various authorities challenge him. But even here, it's clear that he's pretty much fed up. I don't want to focus just today on the specifics of that one story. I want to look a bit wider than that, at what's going on in Luke's story of Jesus. And I want to also think briefly about the fact that this story and the ones around it are the ones chosen to end the church's liturgical year. We're not far away from that. November the 23rd will see the day known traditionally as the Feast of Christ the King, or more recently, the Reign of Christ. And then we'll head into the new church year with the 4 Sundays of Advent that lead us to Christmas. And I'll talk more about this over those next couple of weeks as the stories come together. But for now, I want to think for a moment about the context for this story of Jesus and the Sadducees. Because in one sense, the story itself, or at least its contents, aren't that critical. The real story is what's going on around it. And that's the story of the conflict between Jesus and the rulers of his day, the authorities, the various religious groups. It's important to remember that the setting for this story is Jerusalem in the last week of Jesus' life. And so Luke is building his story to its climax in the narratives of Jesus' passion, death, and resurrection. We've already seen in Luke his entry on the donkey and the response of the crowds, and how that has the attention not only of the Jewish leaders, but the Romans who will ultimately crucify him. And as if that wasn't enough, Luke follows up with the stories of Jesus disrupting the dealers in the temple. And so the stage is set for the conflicts we'll see in chapter 20. At the end of chapter 19, Luke tells us, every day he was teaching in the temple. The chief priests, the scribes, and the leaders of the people kept looking for a way to kill him, but they didn't find anything they could do, for all the people were spellbound what he said. So getting rid of him had become tricky, to say the least, but they were still keen to do it. And so as chapter 20 unfolds, we have these leaders who come to Jesus asking about his authority. Firstly, they give him a conundrum, and he gives them a parable in return about the vineyard owner and the dishonest tenants, and they're stumped. In sports parlance, it might be Jesus 1, leaders 0. And then I love how Luke describes what follows. They watched him and sent spies who pretended to be honest in order that they might trap him. And so they asked Jesus about paying taxes, expecting him to trip himself up one way or another. Not exactly. Give to Caesar that which is Caesar's, he says, and to God that which is God's. Again, he uses their own words to avoid the trap. Jesus 2, leaders 0. And then our story comes next. This time it's the Saducees taking their turn. But the result is very similar. 3-0, Jesus. Finally, he attacks the temple itself in the story that we tend to call the parable of the widow's mite, or the story of the widow's mite rather, and we use it in stewardship sermons. But actually, although it's affirming of the widow who gives all she has, it's mostly condemnation of the temple for letting her do so. Having previously condemned the scribes as pretentious hypocrites, excuse me, having described the scribes as pretentious hypocrites who devour widows' houses, it's a bit pointed, isn't it? And one might expect the scribes to take offence, and one would be right. That's closer to 5-0 in Jesus' favour. And so Jesus' conversations, if that's the right word, with the Sadducees becomes for Luke more than a simple argument. It's part of a chain of such conversations or conflicts where it seems that those in authority are simply queuing up to have their crack at Jesus. And not only do we see the wisdom of Jesus shown clearly, we also see why his life came to the kind of end it did. It was because he refused to be silent about the way things are, particularly when people were oppressed by it. It was because he rocked the boat. He challenged the system. And what's worse, in the eyes of many religious leaders, he did it in the name of God. For us who seek to follow his way, this is really challenging. But I think it's also good news. That's because it tells us that heaven can't be defined or limited by human ways of thinking and being, or by human legalism. It's not contained by our ideas of what's good, bad, or indifferent, or by our notions of who's worthy and who isn't. It's unfettered by our cultural notion of relationship and who belongs with whom or to whom. Heaven is about eternal values, about the love that is God, with us in all moments, all decisions, all actions, and for all creation. And so in our story today, the Sadducees are out to trap Jesus with their question on the resurrection, in which we're reminded that they don't believe anyway. So the question is a nonsense. It's a trap. It's a straw figure. We could describe it in all kinds of ways. That's how Jesus treats it. The shalom of God doesn't play by their legalistic rules and definitions. It's about what happens in this life, rather than just beyond it. As he dismisses the question, though, he makes another point, and I want to finish with this. In their view of things, the Sadducees' question is one of ownership. Whose wife would she be in this nonsense story? That too is a nonsense for Jesus. What's important for him is that the widow, this hypothetical widow, should be honoured and respected. She should be cared for and cared about because of who she is, a person, rather than on the basis of some sort of bizarre legal conundrum. So our stories in worship over the next few weeks invite us into reflection on who Jesus is and what Jesus is for us today. And I think that matters, because how we speak and think of him reflects and influences how we follow. So my prayer for us today and in the weeks to come is that we may be blessed with the wisdom, the faithfulness to discern his way, and the courage to walk it as he did. In the name of the Holy Presence in whom we live and move and have our being. Amen. Blessings.